Hello, you lovely lot, and welcome to another episode of Word on the Street, the podcast that enables you to step away from your business for a very short while and think about all the things you could or should be doing to help you attract and win more new clients, which I guess certainly at the moment is even more important than ever. So today with me, I have the fantastic Robin Bonn. Robin, well, you may already know him. He's always in Campaign magazine. He is an agency transformation specialist, and he has his finger on the pulse when it comes to new business and how to attract and win more new clients. In fact, a bit like me, he's grown up in a new business role. He is going to teach you guys so much today. It's so important for all of us to understand how we can transform and make sure our agencies are fit for what is going to be a pretty turbulent few months for most of us. The recession is upon us. The world seems like it's turning upside down. And I think Robin has got some fantastic tips and things that you can implement within your agency to make sure that you are transforming into an agency that people want and need, and therefore keep your staff happy, keep your clients happy, and do everything that you need to do to stay on top of the game. So without further ado, let's go and meet the fantastic Robin Bonn. So hello, Robin, and welcome, well, one, to Word on the Street, but also to our new little mini recording studio in the corner of the office.
It's a thing of wonder.
It is, isn't it?
It's bijou, I think is the word.
Yeah, what you guys definitely can't see if you're listening only on Spotify, and also can't see if it's us on YouTube, is that we've got like my jacket hanging over a light over here, a lovely plant kind of blocking through a little bit of a see-through here. But apart from that, it's great. It's a new recording experience, and I'm glad to be sharing it I'm glad to be sharing it for the first time with you, Robin.
Well, thank you. It's a real pleasure to have just seen the attention to detail that goes into making this beautiful, safe space for us.
Do you know what? I'm a big listener of Fern Cotton's Happy Place podcast, and in lockdown, she was recording underneath her duvet to get a good sound quality. So I feel like we're slightly improving on recording under a duvet, which would be a little bit weird, right?
It would be a little bit weird. That is true.
So before we talk about, anything and everything that we're going to talk about today, what I would like to learn a little bit more about, as I'm sure our lovely listeners would, is a bit about Robin. So tell me, obviously I know you from our industry, from working with lots and lots of agencies, but tell us a little bit of the potted history of Robin Bonn.
Oh my word. How long's the podcast?
Yeah, don't worry. This can be the whole thing if you want.
Okay, yeah, and I'm sure the audience would absolutely love that. I'll give you the very potted history. So I'll let me think. So I'm the founder of a business called Definery. It is an agency transformation consultancy. So I spend my days working with people in agencies to help them just accelerate their journey from good to great. So that's what we do. In terms of how I got here, I'll give you the very, very sort of high-level summary. I did a science degree that really wasn't very relevant to much at all. Fell into selling, worked in tech for a few years, learnt a fair bit about that. And then around the turn of the millennium, found myself in the agency world. So worked my way up through that, working from lots of small agencies, middle-sized agencies, independents that were sold, global network agencies, and always stayed in and around new business and commercial and kind of marketing type roles. And obviously, as you kind of progress through a career path, you end up picking up bits and pieces about how the wider, agency runs, and you get invited to sit on boards of agencies, and you start to see how the finances stack up and how people strategy stacks up and how leadership stacks up. In 2016, launched Definery as I suppose the observation I had was that I was increasingly being brought into agencies to make kind of considerable change happen in one way or another. Often the kind of commercial role or the sales role is right at the forefront of a group or a board or a chief exec saying we want the agency to be something different than it is now. So you get brought into those roles, and there's a real kind of transformative undercurrent or an explicit part of the job description to change the business. And I think I'd sort of been invited in to do that enough times to recognize that you can kind of make more change happen more quickly from the outside looking in. And so it makes it sound all very strategic when you kind of edit out all of the kind of, the unknowns and the kind of navel gazing, all of it. But yeah, that's how Codefinery started. It was a desire to help change happen more quickly within agencies, and that's what we've been doing ever since.
Amazing. And I'm incredibly interested in this subject because I think myself and lots of other businesses and agencies are experiencing at the moment, the world, well, not only have we, come out of a pandemic in the last few years, which none of us have ever experienced before, but now we're facing a time where, businesses are worried about the future. We're potentially facing a recession. We know in the agency world, often stupidly, and I did see you post about something about this the other day, businesses are looking at how they can cut costs, and often that goes out to agencies very quickly because we are an external cost and we're very quickly cut, but sometimes then brought back in. And I'm even having conversations like that with our clients at the moment. Is it's a scary time. So in terms of our transformation and the things that we need to do, I think that's really front of mind for me in terms of the type of agency that we are, the kind of clients that we serve. And I think I'm going to learn a lot from you today in terms of things that I need to focus on within Street, as well as, hopefully lots that our listeners will learn as well in terms of things that they can do to make sure they're fit for the future. So I guess that probably leads me on to, a fairly big topic, but are there any, big trends or anything that you're seeing at the moment that agencies should or could be doing to make sure that they're fit for what potentially is going to be quite a volatile period?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. As you say, it is a big area. I think that so much of the advice that I would offer, good, sensible, solid practice, anyone that's been through an economic downturn before, or a series of, unforeseen events like, 2008 or the pandemic, what I found is a lot of the advice is just doing the good, solid things that you kind of ought to be doing anyway. I think there's an interesting kind of dichotomy as well between the agency world in general being kind of just often driven more by optimism and charisma than good, solid commercial grounding.
Yeah.
And I think that's a real risk factor for a lot of agencies. So, they're sort of, so many chief execs are sort of optimists in chief. They're very, very willing to kind of inspire the agency forward, if you like. I think in that instance, I think there may need to be a bit of a reality check. So I'm at heart an optimist for sure. And, I think that we as a species and as an industry and as leaders of agencies and advisors to agencies, we all have the wherewithal to be able to kind of navigate stormy waters. But also, in the context of that optimism, I think we have to be a bit more realistic than we often are in agencies. And I say we as I consider myself an agency person, although I sort of sit outside of that. There are some significant pressures around ordinary people and, comfortable middle-class people with solid earnings. There is an enormous amount of pressure on their day-to-day lives, on their mortgages, on their petrol, on their food, on their utilities. And obviously there's a huge amount of, volatility at the moment politically, and difficult to know what's going to go on from 1 hour to the next, never mind 1 year to the next. But in the context of all of that pressure on consumers, the idea that, brands are not going to significantly examine where they're spending their money, I think is pretty fanciful. So if you're not ready for that, then, I think you're kind of adding to the risk that you are sort of inviting into your commercial role, into your commercial world, and into obviously the well-being of your people, as the consequences of that might hit your bottom line. So get real, I suppose, is the first piece of advice I would offer.
Yeah, it's so true, because you can. I am often very an optimistic person at heart. I always like to look on the bright side, but you've got to be prepared for what's about to come, and that is going to mean, in some way, for most of us, any type of business, we're going to have to transform and look at how we're set for this. And I'm so with you on that. I think the people element is probably, for me right now, certainly speaking to clients, speaking to brands, and obviously having my own team and staff, I think a lot of this really stems around people and how we can, I guess, be more helpful, but things that we can do internally to support and change to make sure that we're really supporting our staff and we're supporting our clients because they're people, and we're supporting our clients' customers because they're people, and we're all in the same boat here. So from a people perspective, what kind of stuff could or should agencies be doing?
Yeah, I think it's a really nice lens because, if nothing else, it speaks to, one of the cliches you hear all of the time, which is that, agencies are client centric or customer centric. And I think a lot of the time they're not. I think there's a lot of hot air and lip service that gets paid to these kinds of sort of high minded ideals. And you can see that particularly when it comes to people, and often the absence of really clear people strategy that supports the business strategy within a lot of agency businesses. So I think, for one, just acknowledge there's going to be a lot of people that are quite nervous. And equally, I think there's going to be a lot of leaders that are quite nervous that perhaps aren't, the whole lonely at the top thing. I talk to a lot of people who, if I had a quid every time I had a meeting with somebody who runs an agency where they almost apologize about 3/4 of the way in because they've done 90% of the talking, and they say, oh God, sorry, it feels like a bit like a counseling session or like I'm on the psychiatrist sofa sort of thing. It's like, that's fine. That's kind of how it should be. This should be a safe place where we can, kind of unpack what's going on and talk honestly about kind of what you're enjoying, what you're not enjoying, and where you think, you can improve the business. But yeah, to answer your question more directly, I think the opportunity for agencies to really get beyond, and I think this is happening actually, to be fair, to get beyond a lot of the platitudes that get thrown towards people's strategy, I think is a huge opportunity for many agencies that haven't done this in the past. It's funny you ask, actually. I was at an event last week or the week before, but it was an event full of consultancy businesses. Now, as you will know, and many of your audience, I'm sure, will know as well, as a general rule, consultancy businesses tend to dramatically outperform agency businesses in terms of key metrics, like, for example, profit margin. Like 40% is perfectly reasonable. Most agencies would bite your arm off for 20. In terms of average revenue per head, again, most agencies would be very happy at £100,000 per head. Obviously, in this country, 150, 200, north of that is, of course, not unusual in the consultancy market. But just with that as context, we were at this event. There was a very successful consultancy business that had grown quickly over 10 years, had achieved a really healthy exit, were continuing to grow under new ownership, and they're up to, best part of £50 million now, I think, with something like 300 staff. So they're doing very well. And the interviewer, well, first of all, these people, these leaders of this consultancy were on stage, and they looked like agency people. They dress like them, they sound like them, they, just no difference. They're no brighter, no more motivated, no more kind of, there was nothing that was sort of startlingly different. And the interview was very good. They were asking about their success and kind of what got them, to this fantastic position. And all of the answers they gave were not dissimilar to the sort of answers that you would hear from an agency if they'd been asked kind of, how have you progressed? How have you thought about growth? How have you thought about differentiation? How have you thought about, people and bringing the right talent into the business? So clearly, running a consultancy, running an agency, 90% of it is getting the right kind of smart people and getting them organized in the right way and doing, smart things consistently well and being able to scale that. But the thing that I thought was really striking about it was that these leaders of this consultancy, in the answers they gave, being quite similar about, for example, how they brought the right talent into the agency, it wasn't so much the things they did at the start, it was the commitment and the rigor that they applied to continuing to do the right things as the rules of the game's changed. So fine, bring in the right person when you're 3 people, great. You've got to bring a multidisciplinary person in. Bring in the right kind of person when you're hitting 20 people. You're starting to introduce a little bit more hierarchy, a little bit more clear delineation between roles and responsibilities and process. Sort of delegating, bringing in key people once you're at 50 or 100 people and you can't personally interview everybody. But they've managed to make sure that the rigor and the learnings around, for example, bringing in people with the right kind of values, they've managed to kind of operationalize that and continue to re-engineer that process. But they've never lost sight of the need for rigor and consistency. And that, I think, is something that agencies really struggle with. So when we're talking about agency transformation, and, just as an aside, for some agencies, that's, a short sprint, a little bit of course correction, just making sure they're on the right track, introducing something that can be transformative, but, isn't a journey. That's one form of transformation. Obviously, the other one, the more obvious example is, quite a significant transition, looking at the whole business, et cetera, et cetera. But in any of those cases, defining those changes is one thing, and then making them stick is entirely something else altogether. So this is a very long and rambling answer, but in an agency business or a consultancy business, if you haven't got a clear sense of what's going on for people, I mean, this is pretty trite to say out loud, but it's not rocket science, I suppose, is the lesson. Be mindful about what's going on for people. Be super kind of clear-minded about the kind of people you bring into the business, and understand what's going to motivate those people to stay with you. And I think a lot of that is about being a good business that has a clear place in the market, ideally in a market of one that you define yourself. And lo and behold, some of the pressures of the talent market, particularly in this highly sort of volatile environment, will start to be reduced because you're a place people want to stay.
Yeah, I think that's so important, to build a culture that enables you to attract and retain the right kind of people for your, and I'm such a big advocate of that. I've always recruited the person rather than the skills, because I think you can give a lot of the time, you can teach the skills, but actually having the right person with the right attitude. And for us, that we've got values around being brave and staying ahead of the curve, and taking a much more progressive attitude to our work. That's what I'm looking for in the people that we interview. And we're still quite small, so it's easy for me to still. But we did recruit a lot through lockdown. I didn't interview everyone, but those things are so important. And that's why the amount of agencies I speak to who haven't nailed down their vision, their mission, what their values are, how you can then build an agency that is going to talk about the purpose and the things that you solve for clients, let alone explain that to the people that are going to build your service business, which is made up of people. I just find it crazy.
Yeah, I mean, this again is a massive topic, and I'll try not to give you such a long answer as I did the last question.
This is all about you, Robin. You give me long answers. That's what I like.
So the language we use around strategy, I think, is quite problematic in a lot of agency businesses. We tend to throw around words, vision, mission, values, purpose, why, point of view, positioning, proposition, target audience, persona. There's loads of noise around something as kind of explicit as a positioning statement, and equally something as sort of poorly defined as strategy. And I think that's one of the big challenges that agencies face kind of all of the time, is to get better at this stuff. And back to your kind of original point, particularly heading into a very uncertain at best and potentially very problematic economic scenario, having a very clear-minded strategy and being able to consistently deliver against it, coherently, with a degree of flexibility to adapt to the situation, but just knowing what it is that you're trying to achieve and why. I think that's it's a must-have for agencies, and a lot of them don't have it. As I say, whether they're led by more of that kind of charismatic, sort of inspirational type character, there's no substitute, in my opinion, for being very clear-minded about what it is exactly that your agency can deliver to which particular market. So again, if I had another £1 for every agency that had expressed their strategy to me in terms of objectives or goals, again, I'd be a very rich man. There just isn't a particularly consistent set of thinking around what is strategy, why we need strategy as an agency. And this isn't me claiming to have the sort of one true faith when it comes to strategy. There's all manner of models and canvases and whatever else. But what I find is that a lot of agencies, will kind of do stuff for money, and they'll try and do great stuff, and they'll try and do wonderful work, and they'll try and create kind of good environments, but they'll basically go wherever there is money. There's often a fairly flimsy counter argument to that, where an agency was, oh no, we say no all the time. And actually that's a pretty kind of superficial kind of pushback on the basis that yes, agencies do say no all the time, but that's only when a very problematic industry starts waving a checkbook at them, like tobacco would be one, or perhaps working with let's say a troubling regime in a certain part of the world where human rights are less of a priority, or equality is less of a priority. Those are the kind of easy no's. But actually I think the conversation around the cliche is true, the essence of strategy is sacrifice. So what are you sacrificing on a daily basis? What are you saying no to on a daily basis? How are you ensuring agents clients don't treat you badly because they don't know any better. They're sort of, so many clients have been brought up in a market they've been taught is oversupplied, and actually I think agencies have a huge opportunity to define real space and clarity around their offer, so that they're not in an oversupplied market. As I say, they're in a market of one. So that takes clear strategic thinking. It takes, as I say, real discretion. It takes a willingness on the part of agency leaders to take hard decisions and to, push away a whole variety of options and have the conviction to follow one route. And that's often something that agencies don't do so well.
It does feel scary, I must say. It's something that I've pushed to happen probably at the majority of agencies that I've worked at. And of course, now I'm in the lucky position that I have my own business. I say lucky, challenging sometimes, as we're talking about right now. But it is really hard because I would go in as a new biz director, head of marketing, whatever my role was at the time. But essentially, I was responsible for attracting and winning new clients for the agency. And often the business model itself, I was not fighting, but challenging the CEOs or the MDs to say, we're not able to differentiate ourselves in the market. We don't really know who we are or what we're for, or your vision isn't the actual reality of what's happening within the agency. So it was a really, I would often get really, really stuck. And I think this is really hard for new business people. A lot of those will be our listeners, but also MDs, because at the end of the day, there's only so much that you can say in your sales and marketing strategies if the business isn't set up for the market in the right way. And that's regardless of whether you're an agency, you're a tech company, you're whatever you are. If you've not adapted and transformed to be fit for the market that you are today, you can't market yourself as effectively. And that was a really big battle that I had for a long period of my career. In fact, it was probably one of the reasons that I went and set up my own thing, because I had been lucky enough, I guess, to sit on the board of quite a few agencies as a in that new biz commercial role. I had seen there were lots of agencies out there trying to do lead generation and new biz and marketing, but never whether it was an intermediary or a lead generation agency, I'd never really found one that had truly worked and delivered what they promised. So I was like, well, I know there's something that I can do in the market that's different. So we very much take a marketing approach to solving the sales problem. Now, that isn't right for every prospect that I speak to. And I have to really stand by, and I have on occasion, taken on the wrong type of client that's coming to us with a sense of urgency, that's going, I need leads now because I've basically messed up and not done this properly before, and expecting us to be a very short-term quick solution. And that isn't what Street is. So I have learned over the last 4 years to I have to turn those away, because the client isn't going to be happy because they don't truly buy into what we do and how we solve the new business problem. And it's a very different approach to someone smashing out cold calls or, prospecting emails. We're here to build them an engaged audience and solve the problem forever. But that often does take time. There are things that we can do to speed it up, like put on events, get you in front of people sooner, but it's really hard because I have to stand by our proposition is we solve the problem forever because we take a marketing led approach. We're not going to be bashing out sales calls. If you want someone to do that, you need to go to someone else, and it's hard sometimes because we've got financial targets ourselves, we've got mouths to feed, and I think that's where agencies go wrong, is they get desperate. And that's often, I mean, we're in a much better place today, 3-4 years of me doing the podcast and developing insightful, helpful content that my audience can learn from, that means that we have a huge amount of inbound at Street and we don't have a lack of leads. But agencies that don't do that, and when they come to us, they go, we've not got any incoming leads. All of our stuff has come from referrals. We've never really focused on our own marketing because we've grown from referrals, and our MD know lots of people, or blah, blah, blah. And they come to us desperate. And unfortunately, because they've not done what we do, they're in a stuck position. And it does mean that you take on leads and opportunities, or prospects, whatever you want to call them, that aren't the right fit for you because you're desperate and you don't have anything else. Hey guys, just interrupting very quickly because I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't tell you about Tamba. If you're enjoying today's podcast, I know you are going to love the Tamba platform. Tamba is full of all the insights, hints, tips, and fantastic content and training and templates and events that you need to enable you to attract and win more new clients yourselves. If you enjoy the podcast, it's this kind of content that you'll be able to see, get more of, save to your profile, work through training programs with some of my fantastic guests actually. So if you haven't checked it out already, please do www.tamba.io. That's www.tanba.io. Go have a look. I hope you love it and I hope to see you at some of our online events very, very soon. If you don't know who you are as a business, you don't market your differentiation and you don't stick by that, it can really damage you because you then start to bring on clients that aren't right for you. You're then going to get unhappy staff. It is a really tough cycle, but you've got to be brave. And I don't know what your opinions on that are, but you are, in my head, if you have to get smaller to get bigger, sometimes I think you've got to be brave enough to do that.
Yeah, God, I mean, there's so many leaping off points into that.
Sorry.
No,
I've talked a lot now.
I know what it feels like now to interview me. It's I think it is scary. I think exercising choice is scary. I think having more options is helpful. Choosing between two choices is a dilemma. That's tricky. Obviously, one choice is no choice at all. So I think being able to generate options is a healthy way to get through that. Your point about new business people kind of almost having to fight against the system they're in, that really resonates with me. I've been in that situation, plenty of times. And it's not, there's no bad intent there. Everyone's trying to do their best. But I think often that lack of focus at the top of the business, doesn't have to trickle very far until you've got, really no sort of marketing strategy at all. You're being asked as a new business person or as a agency marketeer to just sort of chuck as much kind of jelly at the wall as you can and see how much of it sticks, and that that's just not good business at the best of times. But what can you do about that as a new business director? And I think I won't name names. I think I once, let's say, irritated a very senior PLC owner with a question about who their venture was not right for, and that person, who a very sort of slick public operator, was a bit flummoxed by that question because it's not really something that we often consider in agencies. As I say, it's easy to say no to a client that's got literally no money, or they come, ethically kind of, it's just a non-starter. But actually, fundamentally, do you know who your kind of sweet spot is? And if you don't, and the reason I say this, if you're a new business director going to an interview and you're sitting down with a board or with a chief exec, it's a really good question to answer. Because if they're really not clear on what that sweet spot is, then fundamentally they're probably looking to you to be some sort of panacea that can just sort of magically kind of create often super vague kind of, well, we want to work with really sexy brands, or or a bit bored of B2B, or a little bit bored of doing hard working retail work. Can we maybe win, I don't know, an Apple or something?
Yeah, let me just go find them.
Exactly. Let me just give them a bell. It's crazy, and yet it sort of happens all the time. So I think it's a really kind of positive and you have more autonomy, I think, than you think as a new business director, because if you're smart and if you're good and you're looking for work, then I think you can afford to find an employer that appreciates what you have inherently learned through listening to podcasts or reading good books. This information is not rocket science. It's out there and it's available. It's just a question of having the courage of your convictions as a sales professional, that when you go and interview with an agency that clearly is going to make life harder for you in the nicest possible way. There might be lovely people, but yeah, go find an agency that really has the courage of its convictions. And your job will be way, way harder. You'll be way, way easier, and you'll be far more likely to thrive. Just something else you said, actually, it just occurred to me, that point about being scary. Making big decisions is scary, particularly if you're the chief exec, or you're the founder and it's your baby and all of that stuff. It doesn't make it easy to exercise that kind of discretion. But one thing I've found from, we must have repositioned. I did count a year or two ago, and I've obviously lost count since, but it's probably something like 70 or 80 agencies we've taken through some sort of process of repositioning or proposition development. We often talk about narrative development, but fundamentally that's it's a word we use because if we went in and said what it is, a lot of agencies would feel like they don't need it, which is this is fundamentally about business strategy. And once we get through the process, they realize that that's kind of what they've got. So it's a little bit of a smokescreen, if you like. But that sort of idea of having focus, there's almost a sort of instinctive kind of buttock clenching response that agencies have to that word, or specialise as another one. They hear that and they often think, oh, that just means we go after one sector. That means we're going to be a retail business, or we're going to be a B2B business, or whatever else.
Isn't that frustrating though? They niche, and they often will then niche and they're taking niche as one specific sector, which it really doesn't need to be. I don't know why they go there. Agencies go there so quickly.
Again, it's back to that point, I think, about having options. Agencies run all the time at pace. And I think I was working with the senior leadership team at one of the network agencies a month or so back. And the chief exec was doing, an introduction sort of before we started a workshop. And she talked about sort of acknowledging that in her SLT, there was a lot of people in that business who were having to sort of work twice as hard. I think she said with like 30% less support behind them. So that kind of, the strain on resources is very, very real. So the practical reality is that everyone is running around like blue-ass flies trying to do more for less than ever before. Clients are feeding pressure into that system. I think we've got to acknowledge that truth is real. But the idea that you don't have an option to do something different, whether it's, to your point, sort of right-sizing the business to get ready for the kind of growth that you actually want, or where you see there's an opportunity for your skill set, your set of aspirations, your ambitions for the business, your ideal working week, what ethical looks like for you, the kind of culture you want to build. All of these are levers that you can, maneuver in order to create a vision for growth that is fit for purpose and does have clear product market fit, and does suggest that there's ways of packaging up aspects of your service rather than just showing up to the market with the same set of capabilities as everybody else and expecting somehow by saying you're the best or the biggest or that you're going to somehow get differentiation from that. It's very difficult to differentiate on your service offering because everyone does the same stuff. The blurriness between agency disciplines that has only got worse, in recent years. It just means that most people do most things. There are no ad agencies that don't do social. There's very few SEO agencies that don't offer content. So the sort of dividing lines between those disciplines are ever blurrier. So yeah, if you think you can rock up at in a marketplace and say we do all these things, but we just do them really well, as if that's going to be, you're just in superlative bingo land. Well, this agency says that they're, they're leading at this, and you say that you're the best at that. So how do I weigh you up against one another?
Yeah,
it just becomes a sort of subjective war of rhetoric, and of course the client is just so, sort of numb to hearing all of that bullshit. And yet agencies still think that's where differentiation lives. It's really not. We're arguing about the expression of a strategy that doesn't exist. Whereas if you've got some real clarity on, if you're a willingness to take some hard decisions because you've got a clear-minded sense of where you want to go, then actually expressing something different is really easy because you've got something new to say. So again, it's not rocket science, but that kind of fear factor I think is very real, particularly when, there's that very kind of ingrained instinctive response that to specialize or to be an expert is somehow narrow or constrictive, or is going to be creatively limiting, or is going to mean you have to sack half your staff because you don't need them anymore because they do multiple things. None of that is true. And there's nothing wrong, by the way, just to make the counterpoint, if you want to be a sector specialist, there's a lot of fantastically well differentiated sector specialists out there. Nothing wrong with that at all. But if that's a deliberate choice because that's where they feel, the business that they want to create will thrive, happy days. But to your point, there's loads of ways of creating, scarcity and irreplaceability in what your agency has to offer. I think the more we talk about that, the more that we sort of open that conversation up for agencies and demonstrate that it's not just possible, actually not even that difficult, then all this sort of endless rhetoric about, oh, there was tens of thousands of agencies in the UK, there's thousands in the US, wherever it is, we're so oversupplied, that means we've got to drop our rates constantly, that means we've got to work through the night, it means we've got to work over Christmas, because if we don't, someone else will. It's all a construct. And unsurprisingly, clients, as professional buyers, as very well trained negotiators, for them, dealing with agencies is like shooting fish in a barrel.
Yeah.
It's a piece of piss to negotiate with us because we're absolute amateurs.
Yeah.
And that starts at the very head of the business strategically, and obviously that then cascades down through the agency in terms of, an account handler or a new business manager knowing that they have the backing and the training and the mindset and the comfort level to push back and to challenge and to be the expert that they're ultimately being paid to be. So I think that was an even longer answer than the last one.
That's a really good answer, though. I love it. But that is, you're so right. It comes from the top. If the team and your staff and the agency don't understand the value that they provide, what they can do and what they shouldn't do, and what you stand for as a business, it's really hard for them to push back to clients. It's really hard for them to explain how they're going to be able to help their clients. So it's something that is so, so important. And I really do believe, values and everything sit around that. It's interesting. Obviously, I'm saying,
Don't get me started on values, by the way.
I know. I mean, that's something we've got ours actually on printed out, and I'm about to change them all because we've had quite a big transformative change at Street recently in terms of start. We've had quite a few people leave over the summer for the first time, but the world is changing. Actually, I'm a big believer in these things often do happen for a reason. It's given us a bit of a reset, and we're transforming as a business. We did start pretty much as an agency for agencies, very much niching in that space. Quite naturally, we've grown into other spaces. So we now work with quite a lot of MarTech businesses. That's a really strong growth area for us. So I've got eyes on that. We've also worked for COVID testing businesses and other B2B sectors quite by accident because a new biz director's gone to be a head of commercial at a big pharma company, which led us into the kind of COVID testing space. But what we do works for any B2B market. So we're transforming in terms of what we do in our niche. We're still a marketing solution to the sales problem, but we're just able to do that to wider market sets now. Now, when I started the business, that isn't what we did, but I've got an eye on the market. I've got an eye on who's buying us. I've got an eye on, the people that we're able to do a really good job for. So my niche is the same in terms of what we do and how we help people, but we're widening our market, in terms of the types of businesses that we can work for now. Now that, I wouldn't have been able to go to market with that story and launch a business with that story because it would have been much harder for me to break through. But naturally, we've got there. So I think having an eye on transformation and understanding your business, and I'm hopefully brave enough to know the things that we do really well and things that make us money and the things that are going to keep my team happy and excited about their job and not feel, we are under a big amount of pressure at the moment. It's really, really hard. But I think we're about to break through that, and come November, December, things will change and evolve again. So it's tough, this stuff. I'm coming at this from a very personal perspective today because we've, I think all of us are having to transform. But for an agency, maybe, or a business, because there are lots of other tech companies, etc., that are probably listening to this podcast, if they don't know how to transform, they understand that they do. Where are the places that they need to look? Talking about some practical steps now, Robin. Where are the places that they could or should? I think most of the time, right? But what are the practical steps that they would need to take apart from obviously getting you in to come and help them? What are the practical steps that they could or should take in order to try and break through and understand how they need to transform?
Yeah, I suppose, again, it's back to language, isn't it? Just even the word transform sounds big and comprehensive and scary, and obviously we use it at Codefinery kind of quite flexibly. As I mentioned, kind of small scale intervention versus something a little bit more holistic or, that just takes more time. I think, to answer your question, if you don't know where you're headed as a business, transformation is a meaningless term anyway. So just fundamentally having a conversation about, well, what do we want to be, and I don't mean to couch that in terms of ambition purely. We want to double in size. We want to hit this sort of arbitrary round number of money or of headcount, or we want to move to America because New York's kind of cool. It's one of the hardest places to succeed as an agency. So I think just getting step one would be just to get beyond kind of fundamental ambition and arbitrary objectives and start to think about, what's actually going to make you happy. What are the emotions and the feelings that you might want to consider as a leader going into, a conversation with your board about where you want to take the business. It's actually probably far more motivating to have a sense of, well, what does success feel like to me, rather than just assuming that, and I think a lot of people have recognized this over COVID, actually, certainly in the conversations I've had. If in the past it's been like, well, I want to be a headcount of 50 or 250, or, I want to exit my business at this kind of multiple. And, a lot of people have done those things and realized that it hasn't made them happy. A lot of people have sort of realized that whatever other kind of achievements they've set out to achieve have been sort of left empty, and they've been left thinking kind of what else, because they're fundamentally not fulfilled by it. So just having that sense of, sort of knowing yourself well enough to have a meaningful conversation about what does growth look like for me? Is it emotional growth? Is it about, cultural kind of sustainability? Is it about leaving a legacy? Is it about kind of creating an environment where people can behave in a certain way? Or, that's why founders are often such an interesting conversation to have, because they're often reacting against something they've seen before. We see, a lot of.
That's why I launched my business.
Exactly. Your example is a perfect example of that. So I didn't like that. I want to do it differently. I think there's an opportunity to do it. So that kind of having a burning passion for something, or a kind of mission to change something, that can be a great place to start. But as I say, fundamentally, I think just get away from the language of scale and achievement. All these kind of very masculine terms, I think, are actually quite unhelpful. They're more like the success markers. You tend to make money when you're doing something good, rather than trying to make loads of money in the first place. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing would be to, once you've opened out that conversation and you're willing to think about, sort of reframe what strategy means, then you can start to get quite practical. So, in our business, there's probably 3 places that we would typically start with that. And often we run a diagnostic, kind of a quick half-day diagnostic, just to be very clear about what is the right place and to make sure everyone is on the same page. But as I say, either dive in straight away and say, okay, you know what, it all kind of, what's the phrase? The fish rots from the head, which all seems unnecessarily dramatic and negative. But let's say the fish thrives from the head, which makes less sense. But like get that clarity, at the top of the business there, and then you can cascade it through the business. And that in itself is transformative. Fundamentally, so many businesses don't have that clarity. So just having something, even if it's pretty rudimentary, you're ahead of a lot of agencies. And that's almost like the biggest insight here is just do something, just don't continue to fudge it. Take some decisions, even if they're wrong, but just get on with it and do something. So there's that, the kind of initial strategic piece. The second one thing we found is that there's often quite a clear difference between the vision of the agency and the viability of that vision. So again, this is almost another symptom of that. You know what, we want to double in size by the end of 2024, or, we want to hit 100 in headcount, or whatever it's going to be. Actually, when you look at how viable that is, it's pie in the sky. It's nonsense. So there's this massive chasm between the sort of stated objectives and the achievability of them. And that's just a massive problem. You can say, we want to be the first agency on Mars. It's like, well, you've got no means of doing that. You're not astronauts. People will die if you try it. So don't do that. So that, as a sort of leaping off point, allows us to sort of look into, where are you headed? Why are you headed there? And also, let's look under the bonnet and start looking at the numbers. Let's start looking about where the profit comes from. Let's looking about the amount of money you retain in the business. Let's look about your appetite for risk. Let's look at the alignment between the people that make these decisions. And then we can start to bridge that gap. So that kind of makes sure that the vision and the viability are actually on the same page. That's often a really healthy starting point. And then the third would be just to grab that transformation agenda by the lapels and say, right, let's just look at this business, holistically and work out, what changes are going to make most difference, most quickly, most easily. So we go through this process called the Agency Transformation Roadmap. It allows us to look at things like strategy, leadership, people, commercial, marketing, sales, pricing, craft, whatever kind of craft or creativity looks like in your business, whether you're a data scientist or a creative agency or whatever else. Once you start to bring those silos together and get the leaders of those parts of the business to have a holistic conversation about where are you going, why, how can these groups of individuals talk to one another better, how can you be more coherent as an organization, have a kind of clear sense of what you're all pulling towards, as opposed to, like in your example, where you've got marketing and sales sort of really being pushed in a direction that they know is not healthy. So if you can cut across all of those silos, get people talking to each other, get them collectively aligning around a set of priorities, and then working through those priorities to say, you know what, these are the things we need to focus on. It's a nonsense to say we have 12 priorities, because they're not priorities at that point. So maybe 3 or 4 things that are going to make huge impact to the business. Can we do them ourselves? Who's going to own them? How long it's going to take? What external impact might we need? Whether that's from a street agency or from an organizational designer or from co-definery or anybody else.
Yeah.
But get a clear roadmap, make sure everybody is bought into it, and be sure that it is going to take you in the emotional, financial, commercial direction that you ultimately want to go.
I love that. You've made me think about so much, Robin. I'm even thinking, I need to change this on the website. I need to do this. So I really hope that everyone else has found this as useful as I have. I am sure some of our listeners are going to want to get in touch. Where can they find you, Robin?
They can find me anywhere that will have me. The first,
like here in my random little corner of the office.
So the best place to go is the website, which is codefinery.com, CODEFINERY. So codefinery.com is probably the first and best place to go.
Brilliant. I will make sure that we pop a link to that in the show notes, and also a link to your LinkedIn, because guys, I promise you, it is so worth following Robin. He puts out lots of really helpful, interesting and challenging content that always makes me think about the position of street, and definitely transformation, positioning. If you are interested in that and today has sparked some ideas for you, then go follow Robin on LinkedIn, because he's always posting about really interesting things. A big thank you for joining me today. I found that really inspirational and helpful, and I've definitely got some things that I want to go and implement at Street now. So a big thank you.
Katie, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure having the chat with you. And this stuff is supposed to be fun. It all gets very doom and gloom sitting here pointing at all the foibles and the limitations of agencies. But I love agencies. So, have these conversations, bring them up in your agency businesses, and enjoy the possibility rather than the fear factor of falling. Enjoy the possibility of where you could go.
Yeah, I think for me, it's about being brave enough to actually make those changes. And if you can do that, and it will feel scary, especially if that does potentially mean, certain people aren't going to be needed within your business anymore, but you've got to be brave enough to make those transformational changes.
Yeah, be brave, but you know what? It doesn't have to be scary. Just make decisions which are going to take you where you want to go. And that, it should be an energizing experience, in my opinion.
Love it.
It's all figure-outable.
It is, exactly. We're going to get there. Honestly, you've given me so many ideas for Street. Thank you so much, Robin.
Thank you. Cheers, Katie.
Guys, I really hope that you loved today's episode just as much as I did. As you've heard, it's all the things that we are discussing are really, really relevant for me right now. So please, if you enjoyed it and you loved today's podcast, make sure that you subscribe and you get notifications for new episodes. We are here every single week. And if there's anything that you want to hear about, please feel free to drop me a line. If there's any specific new business challenges or things that you're facing within your business or agency, drop me a line on katie@street.agency. That's Katie with an IE, KATIE @street.agency. And I will make sure that I find the guests and I ask the questions that are most important to you. I hope you're back here very, very soon. Go and press subscribe.